The sun rose over the Levant like a blade of fire, cutting through the coastal haze and laying bare a battlefield waiting to awaken. The air trembled with a tension older than memory. Dust swirled above the plain, drifting in slow spirals, as if the earth itself were holding a breath. Then came the sound. A distant thunder. Hooves. Thousands of them. An ocean of riders pouring over the ridgeline. 30,000 warriors. The pride of Saladin. The terror of Christendom. And directly in their path stood 12,000 exhausted Crusaders. Men who had marched for 7 days under a merciless sun. Men who had bled, burned, and buried their brothers while arrows rained like iron hail. Men who now faced annihilation at the hands of the greatest Muslim commander in living memory. Yet in this morning, September 7th, 1191, something impossible was about to happen. In 17 minutes, the myth of Saladin's invincibility would collapse. In 17 minutes, Richard the Lionheart would unleash a force so precise and devastating that medieval warfare itself would change forever. But victory didn't spring from strength. It was born from patience, from restraint, from discipline hammered into men who wanted nothing more than to strike back. Their survival depended on a single act. Wait, hold, end, and then unleash hell. In a narrow strip of coastal earth between sea and sand, two worlds moved toward collision. What followed was not a battle, but a reckoning. If you want to know how 12,000 crushed 30,000, stay with this story. It begins long before the charge. The story of Arsuf begins knit with swords drawn, but with two men staring across a world shaped by faith, empire, and centuries of blood. Richard the Lionheart, King of England, Duke of Normandy, Count of Anjou, heir to a martial tradition that stretched back to Charlemagne, had arrived in the Holy Land carrying the battered dreams of Christendom on his shoulders. At 33, he was already a legend. A warrior king whose name made enemies pause and admirers whisper. Yet across the plains stood his equal. Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria. A commander whose victories had redrawn the map of the Middle East. A leader whose recapture of Jerusalem made him a hero to millions and a shadow of dread to those who wore the crest. 4 years earlier, at Hattin, Saladin had crushed the Crusader army. He had captured the true Chris. He had broken the political backbone of the Latin kingdom. To many Muslims, the fall of the Crusader states seemed inevitable. The Franks were divided. Their fortresses surrendered one by one. Their armies shattered. But the Third Crusade altered everything. For the first time in a generation, Europe had sent a commander capable of matching Saladin not just in strength, but in strategy. Richard studied the Sultan with a skill as precision. Saladin interrogated captured knights about Richard's battles in Europe. They admired each other. They feared each other. They understood each other, and that made the next 7 days a chess match played with human lives. After retaking Acre, Richard faced a strategic crossroads. March inland toward Jerusalem, the city every crusader had sworn to reclaim, or secure the coast and protect supply lines before challenging the Sultan's heartland. Richard chose the cautious path, a march south along the Mediterranean toward Jaffa, a march Saladin had predicted. The 80 miles of coastal road were a perfect killing ground. Hills to the east, sea to the west. A narrow ribbon of earth where an army could be bled, starved, and destroyed. But this was not a reckless march. Richard's army of 12,000 was small, but elite. 2,000 knights, each one a weapon of iron, discipline, and devastating impact. 10,000 infantry. Spearmen forming a walking fortress. Crossbowmen whose bolts could pierce armor at 200 yards. Their formation was a living machine. A defensive books, shields locked, spears outward, crossbowmen protected in the center. Saladin's force was larger and more mobile. 10,000 Mamluk heavy cavalry, 20,000 archers, skirmishers, and infantry. Their strength lay not in brute force but in mobility, arrows, harassment, psychological warfare, drums, dust, noise, confusion. Saladin planned to repeat the method that had destroyed Crusader armies for decades. Bleed them slowly. Break their discipline. Wait for the moment they snapped. Then unleash annihilation. But Richard had studied Hattin. He would not repeat its mistakes. This was not simply a clash of swords. It was a collision of philosophies. Speed versus endurance. Mobility versus formation. Emotion versus control. And above all, patience against impatience. What neither commander knew was that the next 7 days would push both armies beyond the limits of human endurance. and set the stage for 17 minutes that would reshape history. The march from Acre began under a white sun that turned armor into ovens and sand into fire. The Crusaders moved slowly at Richard's command, 10 miles a day at most, sometimes 8, sometimes 6. To the untrained eye it looked like madness, but Richard understood something fundamental. Momentum wins battles. Discipline wins wars. He needed Saladin impatient. He needed the Sultan to believe the Crusaders were weakening. He needed the psychological balance to shift. The first arrows fell on September 3rd. Knit villies, whispers, a drizzle of death. Saladin's Hosochas rode in tight arcs along the eastern hills. Loose, turn, disappear. Loose, turn, disappear. The sky darkened with shafts, shields thudded, Hosses screamed, but the Crusader formation held. Richard rode the column, calm as stone. No one charges without the trumpet. Break formation and die. Every knight understood the order. The hardest thing for a mounted warrior was to endure without striking back. Knights were raised to attack, to charge, to break the enemy with speed and fury. Now they were told to wait. In the second day, arrows fell heavier. The pace slowed further. Men marched with tongues swollen from thirst. Sweat dripped from under helmets into burning mail. Crispbowmen struggled to reload, hands trembling from heat and exhaustion. The psychological warfare intensified. Drums thundered without pause. Cymbals clashed. War cries in Arabic echoed across the plain. The Templars in the rear guard rode backward in their saddles, shielding the column from relentless attacks. They looked like phantoms in white cloaks streaked with dust and blood. Their discipline held. But the Kest grew. Dead Hosses littered the sand. Knights collapsed under the weight of armor. Infantry staggered as arrows rattled against shields. Every hour drained strength. Every step deepened despair. In the fourth day, the heat reached 115 degrees. Chainmail turned skin raw. Shields blistered from the sun. Men marched with arrows protruding from armor plates like quills from a tortured beast. Yet still they held. Saladin increased pressure in day 5. More cavalry. Closer passes. Bolder attacks. Knights watched their brothers die without lifting a sword. Some snapped. They charged. They were swallowed, cut down, erased. Their screams reached the column and tightened every jaw. In day 6, the Hospitallers reported that their discipline was reaching its breaking point. Master Gania de Nobles warned Richard that his men could endure no more. But Richard refused to give Saladin what he wanted. He rotated men, adjusted positions, maintained pace. Saladin misread the suffering. He saw a force in the verge of collapse. In truth, the Crusaders were coiled like a spring, compressed, enduring, waiting for one signal. 3 trumpet blasts. As night fell in the 6th day, Richard gathered his commanders. Tomorrow the Sultan must commit everything. It is his last chance. When he does, he will believe we have finished. Richard did not finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The men understood. Patience was about to turn from shield into sword. Dawn approached. The 7th day awaited. And the world was about to witness the destructive force of men who had endured hell and lived. Dawn rose over the coastal plain with a slow and merciless glow, turning the horizon into a band of fire that shimmered over sand and scrub. For one suspended moment the battlefield felt unnaturally quiet, a strange hush that settled like a thin layer of dust over men and horses. Then came the first vibration. It moved through the ground in a faint pulse, so subtle the infantry thought it was their imagination. But the knights felt it in the legs of their horses, in the stirrups, in their bones. A rhythm, a pattern, a warning. Hooves, thousands of them. The mist along the ridgeline tore open as Saladin's army pawed over the crest like a dark tide. 30,000 riders advanced in one sweeping motion, banners snapping like whips in the rising wind, helmets flashing like broken sunlight. The drums began almost immediately. Slow at first, then faster, until the plains vibrated with a thunder that swallowed every other sound. Richard's Crusaders, 12,000 exhausted men who had endured 7 days of heat, dust, and unrelenting harassment, tightened their formation and braced for the storm. The Hospitallers at the front had survived more than any unit should. They marched with swollen tongues, blistered hands, and shields chewed by arrows. Every scar from the weak burned anew as the first wave fell upon them. Arrows came first, not in a scattered drizzle, but in a wall of whistling death that blurred the sky into streaks of iron. Shafts slammed into shields, ricocheted off helmets, sunk into flesh. Hosses screamed as arrows tore into their unarmored legs. Men grunted under the sheck of impacts that rattled their bones. Yet through the case the line held. Saladin's horse archers moved with breathtaking precision. They swept forward, loosed arrows at full gallop, wheeled away before any crossbowman could answer. The movements blended into a deadly rhythm of motion on impact. A storm of arrows swirling around the Crusader bucks, shields thudded, armor rung, dust rose in choking clouds. The Hospitallers had endured this for 6 days, but never with this intensity. The assault was designed to break their will. It nearly succeeded. Taqi ad-Din, Saladin's fierce and fearless nephew, led a spearhead of elite cavalry straight at the Hospitaller Bana. The charge cut through the arrow storm like a blade. They came with sabers raised, horses pounding the earth so hard the vibrations rattled teeth. When they hit the Hospitaller front, the noise resembled a collapsing wall. Shields slammed back, steel struck steel. A knight toppled with a shaft through his throat. Another was dragged from his saddle and crushed under hooves. A third swung wildly at a flashing saber, sparks flying as blades collided. The Hospitallers gritted their teeth and endured. But inside them, after 7 days of humiliation and torment, rage burned hotter than the Levant sun. Taqi ad-Din rode past them laughing, lifting his blade in a gesture of scorn. And in that instant something broke. Master Ganya de Nobles felt the crack inside his chest like a physical snap. He saw his men buckling under the pressure. He saw the taunts, the insults, the unending rain of arrows, the week of watching comrades fall without striking back. "I can't bear this no longer," he growled. Then he lowered his lance. He spurred his horse. In a heartbeat, the tension that had coiled inside the Hospitallers for 7 days detonated. 300 knights surged forward in a furious wave. They had broken formation. They had acted in instinct. And now Richard the Lionheart had only a breath to decide: recall them and watch them die, or commit everything. He chose without hesitation. Now, aid the Hospitallers. His hand lifted. The trumpet screamed 3 long blasts. For 7 agony-filled days every Crusader had waited for that sound. When it came, something primal ignited. 2,000 mounted knights snapped into motion. Armor rattled like chains. Horses snorted clouds of white heat. Lances lowered. The air crackled with tension as if lightning were gathering above the plain. The formation accelerated as one. Templars in the left. Hospitallers in the right. Richard in the center with the English and French banners streaming behind him. The sound of 8,000 hooves pounding the earth rolled across the battlefield like an approaching earthquake. Dust erupted beneath the charge, churning upward into a golden haze that made the knights look like spirits galloping from the heart of the sun. The Muslim cavalry had seconds to react. They unleashed hurried volleys that pinged on cladded rising shields. But the Crusaders didn't falter. They leaned forward in their saddles. They tightened their grip in their lances. Horses screamed as they reached full gallop, and then the world split apart. The first collision hit with the force of a battering ram. A knight on his horse weighed over 1,000 pounds. At 35 miles per hour, they struck like an avalanche of iron on muscle. Lances punched through shields, armor, and bone. Some shattered with explosive snaps. Horses crashed into lighter cavalry and sent biddies tumbling. Sand exploded beneath hooves in violent bursts. Men shouted curses that dissolved into screams. Steel slammed against steel with such force the air shook. The Muslim line didn't bend, it disintegrated. The Hospitallers, driven by 7 days of swallowed fury, tore into Taqi ad-Din's elite cavalry like a comet. Ganya de Nobles personally cut down 3 commanders in the first seconds, his blade moving in brutal, practiced arcs. The wedge of black-cloaked knights plowed through the right wing, coving a path of destruction. Richard's center struck the Mamluk Guard. These were Saladin's elite, the pride of his empire, trained from childhood. Feared across the Middle East. They braced for impact. Richard hit them like a falling fortress. Chroniclers claim he seemed larger than life in that moment, his sword rising high and cutting down with a force that made even armored men stagger. His household knights stayed tight around him, forming a steel fist that punched straight into the heart of the Muslim line. In the left, the Templars adjusted their angle and smashed into the collapsing flank with perfect timing. This created a trap so deadly it resembled a slaughter pen. The Hospitallers drove warriors backward. The Templars crushed them from the side. Sand flew. Horses toppled. Men vanished under hooves. Panic erupted like wildfire. The psychological collapse was faster than the physical one. Warriors who had spent a week tormenting the Crusaders suddenly felt terror slither into their chests. They had hunted these men for days. Now the roles reversed. The Crusaders hunted them. Mamluks who had never fled in their lives pulled their horses away in wild panic. Some riders tossed aside sabers to gain speed. Others tried to escape through dunes, only to be run down by knights whose fury carried them like a living storm. Saladin watched from a hilltop. He saw the right wing collapse. He saw the center bend, then snap. He saw his elite guard fall back. For a moment, even he felt the chill of dread. His banner toppled, net captured, abandoned by bearers fleeing for their lives. Richard saw the opening. He led a third charge directly toward the Sultan's position. His knights, dripping with blood on dust, drove forward with a momentum that felt unstoppable. Saladin's personal guard dragged him back to avoid capture or death. The Sultan had been seconds from annihilation. After that, the plain dissolved into chaos. The Muslim army no longer retreated. It scattered. It dissolved. Riders fled in every direction. Horses crashed into dunes. Men stumbled and fell as Crusader knights tore through the broken formations, cutting down stragglers until horses grew too exhausted to run. The pursuit stretched for almost 3 miles. Even then, crossbowmen shot fleeing soldiers until Richard finally called recall. 17 minutes. That was all it took. 7,000 Muslim soldiers lay dead across the plain. Biddies sprawled in twisted shapes. High-ranking emirs glittered with broken armor half buried in sand. The elite of Saladin's army had been erased in less time than it took to finish morning prayer. 2,000 knights had charged. 1950 returned. The battlefield did not lie. The sea breeze carried the smell of sweat iron on dust. Horses winded between biddies. Shields lay cracked. Lances splintered. Nothing remained of Saladin's legendary aura. The myth of his invincibility died in that plain, shot at alongside the bones of 7,000 warriors. And the victory had been paid for not in strength alone, but in 7 days of restraint. 7 days of suffering. 7 days of impossible discipline. All unleashed in 17 minutes that changed the medieval world. When silence finally returned to Arsuf, it felt heavier than the roar of battle. Crusaders walked among the biddies in a daze, unable to comprehend the scale of what they had done. Knights fell to their knees in prayer. Crossbowmen dropped to the sand and wept. The air smelled of sweat, salt, iron, and grief. Richard did something few expected. He refused pursuit, refused glory, refused the chance to annihilate Saladin once and for all. His men begged. Jerusalem lay open. Victory seemed within reach. But the Lionheart knew the cost. The army was exhausted. Horses foamed at the mouth. Men staggered. Pursuit would stretch them thin, drain strength, invite ambush. He had won through discipline. He would not lose through pride. Saladin withdrew. His aura of invincibility cracked. Garrisons surrendered. Negotiations replaced holy war. The myth that had fueled his armies evaporated. Arsuf became more than a battle. It became a lesson. A demonstration of what iron discipline and perfect timing could achieve. A reminder that courage is not the moment of charge, but the days before it. The true victory was not the slaughter. It was the patience, the endurance, the choice to hold when every instinct screamed to strike. Arsuf stands in history as a testament that the strongest armies are not always the largest. They are the ones that know when to wait and when to let the storm break. History is filled with moments where courage and discipline shaped the fate of nations. If stories like Arsuf move you, if you believe the past still speaks to us today, join us in this journey. Subscribe. Explore more forgotten battles, untold legacies, and human stories that shaped our world. The past is not silent. It waits for those willing to listen.